Well, tonight it's a great pleasure to have as our guest Barry Scholl. Barry?
Thank you, Don, and thanks to the Entrada Institute for having me tonight on this wintry evening.
We didn't know it would be, although January 5th was pretty safe for that. Well, let's dig into a little history. Your family has a long history and deep roots in Wayne County, so let's start with some family history, maybe. Who are some of the famous and perhaps infamous folks in your background?
Well, my great-grandparents, who were buried in Teesdale, came here in the mid-1870s. Like a lot of the early inhabitants, they were sent to colonize the area by the LDS Church. They fell away from the church at a pretty early stage in settling here. But my grandfather and his brothers and sisters grew up here. Grandfather was born in 1878 and lived in Torrey until he was in his teens, when he went down into Glen Canyon and worked during the mining boom, and then to Price, and then he had family who were horse traders in Oregon and went there. And always loved Wayne County, but never came back to live. His younger brother, Arth Chaffin, was kind of a famous personage in Wayne County, ran the Hype Ferry, and was credited as being the guy who discovered Goblin Valley. I don't know that he ever took that particular accolade, but he's widely regarded as the kind of the first person to at least publicize that to the outside world.
How long did he run the Hype Ferry? Explain where that is.
The Hype Ferry was on the Colorado River, where the Trackite Creek runs down from the Henrys into the Colorado. So it's on the southeast side of the Henry Mountains. He bought the property in the late 20s from a fellow in Richfield named Orrin Snow, and owned the property until the mid-60s, as I understand it. Is that right, Will? When the rising waters of Lake Powell made it impossible to run the ferry.
A little earlier than the mid-60s.
Okay, but he built the ferry with an old Model A Ford and a length of cable, and you could fit one or at most two small cars, and for $5 you were able to cross the river, and it was the only vehicle crossing between Moab and Lee's Ferry.
$5 at that point, though.
Yeah, we've got some original tickets around somewhere from the ferry, and I think they were $5. But it was that, or go all the long way around if you wanted to get into White Canyon, into that area. So there was a whole chunk of the state that was pretty much inaccessible to vehicle traffic, except through the Hype Ferry.
I recall some stories. Your dad and your uncle, they had kind of rough-hewn attitudes about Wayne County. Can you share some of that?
Sure. So Arth Chaffin was elected as a Wayne County commissioner in the 30s as a socialist. Really? The country was pretty close to revolution at that point, the trough of the Great Depression. He was, not conventional in his, what we would consider his political stances. And his older brother, my grandfather, would tease him a lot. He'd say, well, when I was a boy growing up in Wayne County, the smart ones grew up and moved away. And then there were people like you, Arth. You grew up and got elected to the county commission. I don't think that was too, I think it was pretty much tongue-in-cheek, although I don't know how widely appreciated that view was. But yeah, they were sort of rowdy. They bootlegged, they worked in the mines, they did what everybody else down here did, which was tried to piece together a living.
Sure. How did he serve a second term?
I don't know. Was it one term for Arth?
I don't remember how long he served, whether it was one term or
Barry has his historian.
Yeah, I have my cousin William here. But I know that he served one term, and I know that it was on his way back from a meeting of the area county commissioners in Green River when he decided to take a shortcut across the desert and discovered the Goblin Valley. And certainly, I'm sure Native Americans and some of the stockmen in the area knew it as well, but Arth was the one who had sort of made note of it, and in the 50s started to publicize this as a possibility for a national park.
And then somewhere along here, your dad came along, and then you. Huh?
My dad was from South Dakota. He ended up in Utah because he was a mining engineer. My mom was from Wayne County stock and liked it here, particularly as she got older. And I had cousins and second cousins here who, some of whom were quite a bit older, but I knew my uncles pretty well, and they loved coming back, and they'd go visit Uncle Arthur, and sometimes they'd imbibe an adult beverage and tell stories, and of course I'd pay close attention. So
What are some of your early memories of Torrey?
it was always windy, and people always had red faces. And I distinctly remember that. I remember once coming down with family and staying in a hotel, and I won't name the hotel, and finding toenail clippings in the bed, and my mother was just appalled. And I was probably about 8 then. But we'd go see my Uncle Arthur, who lived in Teasdale, in Will Barclay's house. And I thought it was really cool because it had been kind of a rooming house during the school year for kids. If they lived on the outlying ranches and farms, the families would send them in to go to school there. And so the rooms had numbers on them, which I thought was just the coolest thing ever. So that was nice. And when my grandfather and great uncle had started to talk politics and family history and stuff, a lot of times they want to get rid of the kids, so they'd give me 25 cents and send me down to the Mercantile, which is right in front of, still in Teasdale there, although it's now an art studio. That point, I think they were selling gasoline, and I remember being really impressed because they had everything from overalls to candy bars to tools, but they'd give me some pocket change and send me down there, and I distinctly remember that. I remember hiking a lot, and I remember once with the whole family here for a reunion, we went down onto the Dirty Devil, and all took off our shoes, including my elderly grandfather and some of the other older relatives, and played in the mud. So they still had a lot of Wayne County in them.
I'll have a mud question for you a little bit later, but now you grew up in Salt Lake City.
Grew up in Salt Lake City.
Schools?
University of Utah, Kansas State, in Manhattan, Kansas. Westminster College, and in law school at the U.
What did you study at Kansas State?
English.
Okay.
And then Francois Camoin, who happened to be one of the founders of Entrada, called me there and said, I'm sure you're tired of the intolerable character of Kansas. We can give you a teaching assistantship here if you want to come back. So they were able to find me one.
At the University of Utah.
At the University of Utah, yeah.
Okay. So as you were going through schools, I have to put that in plural now, huh? At that point, what were some of your dreams and aspirations?
Well, I always wanted to be a journalist, and liked it a lot. And then I was working at a .com in the early 2000s, and realized that as soon as the vehicle to transmit news got better, in other words, as soon as it wasn't a dial-up, that my industry was going to go the way of being a horseshoer or something like that. It was something that was no longer be a viable way to make a living. And so I looked around at what else I could do, and it was either PR or law, and law felt maybe like a better choice for me. Stability, and just PR, you have to be kind of practiced in the art of insincerity.
What? Mark that down. So what's a piece of writing that you can look back on that you feel really proud of?
When we did Utah Guide to the State, and that was Francois and I updated the book, and the background of that story was that Ward Roylance had done the 1976 edition, and he was kind of the best Utah generalist of his time. He could photograph, he knew history, he knew geography, he knew a little bit about economics, he could talk about the development in the state and the history of the state. So when it came time for the state centennial, this ad hoc group approached Ward and said, look, how about an update that's not going to be used as a doorstop? I don't know if you've ever seen the 76 edition, but it's huge. In fact, there's what they call a touring edition, which is paperback, which is still 500 pages. And then there's the omnibus edition, which is 2,500 pages or something. And, so you basically have a set of encyclopedias all in one binding. And anyway, this ad hoc group came to Ward and said, how about an updated version? And he was feeling a little bit at that point like he didn't maybe want to do all the travel, and he approached Francois and me about helping out. And then he promptly died. So we had a contract to do a book, and the inspiration for the book was no longer with us. So that was a book we had fun with. It sold well and was well reviewed.
Well, tell us about Ward.
How much time you got? Ward was, well, Mary knew Ward. He contained multitudes. He had originally started to do a School of the Earth in the late 60s and actually attracted a lot of support for it. He had Ken Slight, the famous river runner and guide, and Edward Abbey and others, really got behind this idea that, the way to increase love for the land was to introduce people to the land, to take them out on hikes and horseback trips and jeep tours and that sort of thing. And he was one of those guys that, I don't know if he was born ahead of his time or after his time, but he was a guy out of time in the sense that he had a great idea, but it was hard for him to build support for that. So he ended up losing his house in Salt Lake over it. Came down here, and all he had was this weedy lot, the corner of Main Street and 2nd West, that a friend had left to him and his wife, Gloria. So May Day 1976, he plants the main pole. If you were looking the other way with the camera, you could see, I can indicate that, and builds Entrada. Never built anything before in his life. He bought a whole bunch of Time Life books on, plumbing and wiring. Never read any of them, but he bought them. So he built this place, and I got to know him through Southey Swede, who was another Wayne County character. But Ward and I knew a lot of the same people, and he just immediately, for whatever reason, took to me. We became friends, and Ward immediately got into this idea that we're going to do a new School of the Earth. And given his history, I wasn't sure that was the best idea for him. But Gloria died in '93, earlier in the year, and he really needed a project. He was bereft. And so there were a group of us, Pat Kearney from Hondu, Scott and Mary Smith, Southey at one point, Francois Camoin, Kathy Kankinen, who got behind the idea. And Entrada was incorporated in August of '93. Ward died in November of '93, suddenly, after having had a minor heart attack. And so that left us with, the shell of an organization and some ideas, but no idea how to go forward.
Well, what's your recollection of what the vision was at that point?
It's remained pretty consistent. It was an idea that it was going to be a School of the Earth, that it was going to focus on the light, not the heat of the issues, and that it was going to be an opportunity for people to come together over, a shared love of land, arts, humanities, creation of new works. And we modestly say, well, we haven't changed that much over the time, but the world's changed a lot in the last 30 years.
So over those early days, like the board meetings must have been exciting.
Well, yeah, we would count how much money we had in our treasury in single digits at times. There was a lot of disputing. I remember a few meetings got heated, and people would get up and storm off, and then pretty soon they'd calm down and come back. But there was a lot of give and take. There was a lot of, people were dedicated. They wanted to see it succeed. And it just seemed like the idea whose time had come. And there were people that, thank goodness the community supported it. And there was some initial skepticism. And I remember occasionally getting hate mail about how dare you do this or how dare you do that. But, happily a lot of that's faded away over time. I think virtually all of it. And, with each phase and each group of supporters and each group of board members, there have been new ideas introduced, and sometimes they've gone back to old ideas and revisited those and found that the time was right.
Mm-hmm. We'll get back to Entrada in a bit, but I wanted to ask you about music. When did music come to play in your life?
Well, my sisters all had a lot of talent. My sisters are all quite a bit older than I am. The sister who's closest in age to me is 8 years older, but they all played, and she played piano and flute and could sing. All of them could play piano and guitar and some other instruments. My dad was musical. My mother wasn't particularly, but she liked music. So I don't remember what it was, but I remember absolutely at about the age of 13 I had to have a guitar. Absolutely must have a guitar. To the point, I'm sure I drove my parents crazy with constant haranguing and nagging. But So as soon as I got one, I took to it. I mean, I'd be the kid that would cut class and go back and practice and slow down the record, the turntable, so I could copy. And I remember distinctly buying an Eric Clapton double album compilation and just thinking, man, this is Nirvana. I found the greatest music ever made, and loving that. And there were people that were more talented, certainly people who could sing and I couldn't, but nobody practiced harder than I did. I mean, once I got my teeth into it, I would not let go.
Did you study piano as well?
Yeah, but as a kid I did, and then after a year at the university, I had a multidisciplinary scholarship that meant I could take whatever I wanted until the U got tired of it. Told me to graduate. The idea of an 8-year plan was maybe not something they wanted to encourage, so I wasn't there 8 years, but I was there 5.
But you're very versed in the theory of music and chords and whatnot.
I just thought it was fascinating, and I liked math, and music theory was math. It made sense to me, and it was easy to transpose and arrange. When I take the music theory classes, I was the guy that could, put something into a different clef without too much difficulty.
So did you ever see in your mind Eric Clapton opening for you?
No, but I sure, there was nothing as a kid more exciting than like the release of a new album by somebody like Bob Dylan or Emmylou Harris or Eric Clapton or Dire Straits, whatever it might be. You'd wait for that release date and ride your bike down to the favorite record store.
Well, at what point did you start coming down to Torrey more often and get, what would I say, serious about the area?
I tried to buy some property when I was in college. It was probably about where Hunt and Gather is. It was an artist in Salt Lake was selling it, and she had it advertised in for whatever reason, God knows why, in the Daily Utah Chronicle at the university. Talk about an audience with no money, college students. Yeah, that's who we want. But it was cheap, and I called her and went and looked at it and tried to con my parents into, well, I'll pay for it. You give me the down payment. Of course, they weren't having any of that. So that would have been late 80s. By 92, my best friend in college, who's still among my best friends, and I bought property over in town, and I distinctly remember us buying it and meeting Kathy Bagley to do the closing, and both of us just thinking, oh my word, what have we done? We're on the hook now. We're adults. We're 23 and we own property. But I remember going over to get a P.O. box, and Vera said, well, do you have property here? And I said, yeah, we just bought the property and identified where it was. She said, okay, I know that property. Do you have a house? I said, no, we don't have a house. Why do you want a P.O. box? Well, I might send myself stuff. Okay, well, then I guess you can have a box. Do you want a large box or do you want a small box? Well, I might be sending myself stuff. A large box would be nice. We don't have any large boxes. Okay, I'll take a small box. Well, you can have a medium. Okay, you offered me small or large. Now there's a third choice here. This is like, studying for the LSAT. But anyway, that was 92 that we bought that, and we come down and camp, and we still own it. We're still pals, and it hasn't killed our friendship. So knock on wood.
Great. So then, at the point you had the teaching assistantship at the university, from there, did you go directly from there to Salt Lake Magazine?
No, I was at Catalyst Magazine for 3 years. Another, where you have people in your life who kind of steer, but for that person's influence, your life might have turned out differently. Francois said, well, there's this magazine, and they said they're looking for a writer, and I told them, God knows why, but I told them you might be able to pull this off, so go talk to Greta DeYoung. So I go over, I don't have any clips, I don't know anything, but whatever reason, Greta saw something in me and says, yeah, we'll give you a job, and we'll pay you, some munificent salary, $500 a month or whatever it was back in the day. My apartment, I remember distinctly, lived at 1604 East, 17 South in Salt Lake. Some of you know that area. That's right by the Presbyterian, Wasatch Presbyterian, right up from around the corner significantly from Smokey's Records, where I spent all my spare cash. But my rent then was $275 a month. So on my teaching assistantship, or what I was making at Catalyst, if I was careful, I could get by and live cheaply. And then from there, I went to Salt Lake Magazine. A buddy of mine recruited me, and that was 95.
So doing a magazine, a lot of deadlines, a lot of hand-holding of publishers or owners, right?
Yeah, we could say that.
Then at some point, well, actually several times, you thought about law school.
Yeah, I took the LSAT once before and talked to Deborah 3D. Why do you know Deborah 3D? And Deborah said, I don't think you're ready. She said, go and explore this publishing thing and see if that's what you want to do. And so that would have been in the early 90s. And then I went back in around 2000, I guess. And I was a little bit older when I went. But there were people that were older. I was not the oldest person in my class. I want to know that. I want to emphasize that. I was not the grandfather in there.
That's good. The uncle, maybe.
The uncle could be.
Let's talk. You've mentioned Francois several times, and of course, in the expansion, as you can see, some of the detail here, expansion of Entrada House to have a great hall, and revamping of the house. There'll be a library.
Yes.
The Francois Cameron Library. That's still to be determined about what it's going to look like, of course. But tell us some more about Francois.
He had grown up in Nice, France. His mother had married an American serviceman. When he came to America, and his friends were liked to needle him about this, he was Andy Doctorow. His father was Doctorow, which is significant to the story. And he was Francois André, but he decided to Americanize his name. I don't think that lasted too long. He went back to being Francois. Francois was a creative writing professor at the University of Utah, and just a great guy, and a photographer, and had a lot of interests, and had a neat house up on M Street and 6th Ave that he had done a bunch of renovations to. And for another, just a person whose influence kind of can change the course of your life, and a very good writer, and somebody who wasn't doctrinaire about what his students wrote. So if he didn't understand it, that was okay by him. In fact, that was great. But he encouraged writers to find their own voice. So I think his wife was out of town, and I was coming down here. He said, well, can I go? And I said, well, Francois, you hate nature. You said you're a lot more interesting than rocks. Why would you want to come? So, well, I don't have anything to do. Better than boredom, I guess. So he came down, and he absolutely fell in love with Torrey. Absolutely, just head over heels in love. And so he would come down every time that he could, hang around with us, and got to know Southey and knew Ward, Brad Bowman over at Calf Creek, Pat Kearney. When I got him to go on a horseback trip, which was, Pat loves that story, with Gary George, her husband. And, Francois was sort of an urbane kind of guy. So 4 nights out camping in a tent and traveling via horseback was a story that he told with some chagrin. But Francois and his family has a foundation, and reached out to us and said, look, we'd love to support a writing workshop again. And we had done one historically. Hadn't done one due to some changes in the literary scene, but we are doing that again. We're full bore in that, and we'll have a library named in Francois' honor. And we couldn't be happier about the Doctoral Foundation support. Just thrilled.
It's a very significant support that's basically guaranteed for
It's ongoing. Yeah.
You're an okay guy.
As long, and we will continue to do that in honor of Francois being open to a lot of different genres and approaches, and kind of be true to his spirit.
So the first one was held in October, and then number 2 will be this spring.
This spring,
and that's probably going to be the.
Yeah, that'll be the time period, and it'll open to all writers of different levels, and we'll have an editor and agent there to kind of give some professional feedback, and should be a good
I should
event.
tell people that Zach Podmore, who some people may know, he is part of the
Yeah,
Reporting for America program, and it reports for the Tribune on Southeast Utah. He wrote a book called Confluence, and he's in the process of writing another book now about what's happening to Lake Powell. And he is the writer in residence. He'll be physically here in the middle of March for 2 weeks. So
be a chance to interact with Zach. He's a heck of a writer and a great thinker. It's going to be really interesting.
Francois, talk about the Muddy River.
Oh God, no! All right, I still have PTSD, and Will remembers this story. So, to promote Entrada, we put together, with support from the Utah Humanities Council and from others at the time, we put together a show about the history of Glen Canyon. Will Barkley was kind enough to provide some moving footage, some movies, and we had a lot of good still photos, and we had stories about the old, pioneers and river runners and prospectors and roustabouts, and Glen Canyon was quite a place. So we put together the show, and it was a combination. Will would often provide fiddle. I'm not sure you were on that particular event when we got stuck in Muddy Creek. So we did it in Moab and had a crowd, and we would use the proceeds from the show to support Entrada programming. So we did it in Moab on Friday, and we were coming over to here, and it must have been the first or second year of Entrada. It was really early on, and Francois had gotten into these old maps, and so he'd say, "Oh, we're going to take this road, and this is an old Texaco map from the 1950s, and this is going to be a great route." And, no, Francois, we really have to be in Torrey to be set up, and oh no, it's going to be great. So I guess we camped in Goblin Valley, and then we took the other route through, got to Muddy Creek, and it had rained, and we had my four-wheel drive Explorer, and I said, "Well, I guess we can make a run at this." And we made a run in it, and we sank right up to the frame, right in the middle of Muddy Creek. And so a couple of cars came along. Guy tried to pull us out with the tow rope, broke his tow rope. We were stuck. And then the car started to list. And we thought, okay, we're done here. So finally, somebody said, "Look, we don't have a tow rope, but we'll give you a ride into Caneville." And they have a radio phone there. And then we're talking way pre-cell phones here. This must have been 95. So I think... what is the name of that cafe where they used to do the spring fling and the fall ball? It's still there, but I don't think it's open anymore. It's over by Randy's place. Anyway, there's on the south side of the road there in Caneville. They had a radio phone, and so we called the highway patrol, and they patched us in, and we got a tow truck out of Hanksville. And I hitchhiked and got a ride. And I was wet up, all the way to my pockets, and started in carrying a projector in one hand and a backpack in the other. And Francois stayed behind with my car, and he said it took 5 minutes for him to pull the car out. They just attached a serious tow cable and pulled it right out. But that was getting stuck in Muddy Creek. $500 lesson back then. But we managed. The show went on. We did the show, soaking wet, and it seemed appropriate to do a Glen Canyon show and squishing around in our sneakers. But we made it work.
And Francois had another story about the outdoors.
Yeah. It's probably, damn it, Scholl, no more of these trips. Wasn't my idea.
So now, as an attorney, you've moved through several things. What's a typical day like? How does it compare to a typical day as a glossy magazine editor?
They're both deadline driven. In both instances, it's important to see how many balls you can keep in the air. Both are about problem solving in a lot of ways. The work is very different, but I'm really glad I had that background, because I learned to operate in a deadline-driven environment where you've always got one deadline upon another stacking up, and not that different than filing deadlines or whatever else you might be doing, clients calling and demanding completion of their projects. Similar, learning to collaborate with other people, learning to communicate. The skill sets are not all that different, even if the work is.
So without naming names, what's one of your most interesting clients and situations?
Boy, I don't litigate, so you'd have to ask that to some of my litigation partners, but my clients are generally really people I like, and I've had a lot of the same clients, knock on wood, since I started practicing. They don't seem to, in spite of my my grumpiness, they don't seem to ever quit, which I'm actually glad about, and keeps the doors open and the lights on. But I've had clients that have been really successful that started really small, and I've been happy to whatever small part I've played in that, I'm really happy about, and honored to do that. The nicest thing is when one client sends another client. That's just that kind of referral is, there's no substitute for it.
So you do primarily transactional?
I'm strictly transactional. I represent businesses and individuals in everything from employment to trademark to contract review and drafting.
Did you ever consider litigation?
I clerked in the Court of Appeals for Judge Greenwood, who I like tremendously, another Wayne County resident. Mm-hmm. But it was enough for me to realize I didn't like I didn't like litigation. It wasn't. I like the idea of being able to resolve things through talking, and you can't always do that, but it seemed like an approach that worked for my temperament.
Well, I've got always questions that can last the whole evening. If anybody in the audience has questions, you can go to either one of the microphones. And those of you watching live on Facebook, you can use the chat function, and Alan will relay those questions to us or comments. Alan, anything coming in yet?
Not yet, but we do have viewers.
Good.
Well, that's better than not having viewers. Thank you.
Yeah. Often the viewers outnumber the live audience. Of course, on a night like this, I'm not surprised. Of course, nobody questions? Nobody wants to stump the lawyer? Okay, go to the microphone, ma'am.
Barry, I'd just like to know your definition of a short hike.
Oh gosh, that's that. It was the weekend when JFK Jr.'s plane disappeared. Y'all remember that? I think it would have been the 4th of July in '97 or '8. We had been doing a lot of hiking at a particular place that I won't identify, but it's a hike in. It's about a 15-mile round trip hike. And we had done it in May, and it was a hike. You felt it by the end of the day, but there was a lot of flat hiking. It wasn't bad. It might be more like 12 miles, but it was more than 10, certainly. And if you ask anybody who was on this second hike, it was probably more like 20, but I think that's just hyperbole. So we went over the 4th with some family members and Ray OMB, who some of you knew, into this place, and it was a long drive up over a dirt road, and we got sunburned to start the day. Went in, and it was hotter than blazes, but we did complete the hike, and in hiking out, we were completely out of water, which was not good judgment on anyone's part. So my sister had printed shirts that said, I survived Barry's short hikes, and gave them to everybody who had been on the hike. And for whatever reason, most of those people refuse to go hiking with me now. They will not go. If you're going on one of your short hikes, I'm going to stay home. I don't understand.
So whenever you leading a hike is offered as a fundraising event, there needs to be a footnote. Is that right?
Yeah, short is relative.
Go ahead, Alan.
Yeah, we've got 3 questions suddenly from our Facebook audience.
Right.
The first one for Barry is, just scrolled past me. Curious if you have any plans for the Robber's Roost after Entrada moves.
Oh, stole my question.
Oh, well, if somebody has a proposal, I'd be interested in listening to it. It's a family-held property, and the way to make a small fortune in book selling is to start with a large fortune. And since we didn't have any kind of fortune after 20 years of doing it, we just didn't have the wherewithal to continue it. But I really miss having it. And if someone came with the right proposal, that would be something we'd be very much interested in entertaining. If that doesn't come forward, we're thinking a recording studio, so we could record in here. I love all of the stuff that James has, but you can't put a drum set in there. And so we could do that here. And I think Mickey plays drums, is what I've been told.
Italian restaurant, maybe?
Or an Italian restaurant would be another one that we've talked about. Yeah, so there's some definite options for it. We'd have to do some things with the heating and with some of the plumbing, but that could be done.
All right, we have a second question for you, Barry. And that is, how did you meet Ward, and how did the Entrada Institute come about?
I met Ward through, I had, as a journalist, I guess I was already a journalist but I would read the public forum in the Salt Lake Tribune. We're old enough to remember, a print newspaper, and people would write, op-eds, and there were always these great letters from somebody in Torrey, Utah, and I thought, well, who is this Ward Roylance guy? So I was pretty good friends with Southey. He and I used to go hiking, and I hadn't thought of Ward in a long time, and Southey said, well, do you want to meet Ward Roylance? My gosh, it was like meeting Eric Clapton. Sure, I want to meet Ward Roylance. So Ward told us all about this enchanted wilderness group that he had in the 70s that I mentioned earlier, and he said, we need a school of the earth here. We need to bring people together and have them kind of work on these issues and celebrate arts and stuff. And it seemed like a pretty good idea. So I got to know Ward, and I think I'd known Ward and Gloria for a couple of months, and Gloria died. We'd gone to dinner with Ward and Gloria, Francois and I, and Gloria died later that night. No, I don't think we were prompted it in any way, but so Ward at that point was bereft and depressed, and for good reason, and wanted to start an organization.
And you said there's another one, Alan?
Yes, there is.
I'll ask one in the meantime. So do you think Ward and Francois would feel comfortable with where Entrada is headed right now?
Francois, yeah. I don't know with Ward. Ward was a contrarian. And whether he would have thought it was great or whether he would have thought, you need to be doing more with geology and biology and botany. I don't know whether he, whether he would like the mix. I think he would approve of the approach to programming, but I never knew Ward to read a lot of fiction, for example.
Got a fun question for you here. What year was it that you went hang gliding off the Golden Throne in Capitol Reef and got caught by a park ranger?
There's no truth to that story. That's Frank McIntyre punking the group. But thanks, Frank. No, I've never done anything illegal in the park. I'm far too fond of the park to do anything except leave a minor footprint here and there.
But that implies you did do something illegal elsewhere.
No, not that either.
You've never done anything illegal in the park.
Or elsewhere. I'm a lawyer. I'm an officer of the court. No.
Go ahead, Alan.
And we have yet another question. Tell us about who interviewed the cowboys and who wrote the book, The Cowboys of the San Rafael.
Oh, okay. That was Dick Negri out of Denver. They're talking the Tales of Cane and Lance Cowboys book, which great book. If you like oral history, this is a really fun book, and it talks about there's a lot of Wayne County because, as I mentioned, the Chapins were here before they went over and ranched where the San Rafael enters the Green. So about 20 miles south of Green River in the desert. And they would do this get-together every spring called the Cowboy Caucus. Ned Chapin and Dick Negri and Willa Dean Chapin Wells and a bunch of other people came. It was pretty much open to everybody, but they would have this oral history session, and people would show their artifacts. So Ned and others would bring old saddles and branding irons and that kind of thing. Really fascinating stuff, really good. And these guys were kind of living a 19th century existence into the 20th century. So they'd send Ned out when he was a kid to Valentine Bottom on the Green and have him take care of the cattle all winter by himself. No power, just canned goods and a side of beef. This is 1930s that he was doing that. And he had a battery-operated radio that he could turn on occasionally. And he said one time he caught a college dance, and it made him so homesick that he pretty soon after that moved to Bakersfield, never came back. Come back to visit and loved it, but it was a hard scrabble existence. So this was Dick Negri, and he interviewed a lot of those guys while they were still around. They still had good memories, and they'd get together and swap lies, and sometimes there was an adult beverage involved, and really an interesting book. And I know that it's available, or was last time I checked, at the John Wesley Powell Museum in Green River, but it's Utah State University Press, and it's out of print, unfortunately.
So would you ever consider doing a book about your family?
I think a book on Wayne County would be great, but not one like the Centennial Histories, but one that really kind of knows where the bodies are buried. And you could talk about, you could talk about Ward, you could talk about the Paces, you could talk about Buddy Merrill, who grew up here, who was a Buchanan who played guitar on the Lawrence Welk Show. Dick Sprang, Richard Sprang, who lived at Fish Creek Cove, who drew Batman comic books and who was the world's first telecommuter. All of these old, Wayne County always had a really interesting mix of personalities going way back, but certainly starting in the 20s when Dean Brimhall went into Fruita. Brimhall had been in the Roosevelt administration and had worked in education at BYU. But he was kind of the first guy as an artist who came down here, and then a bunch of his friends followed him. So you had all these interesting artists. Wallace Stegner's family had a cabin at Fish Lake. You had the dentist, Doc Inglesby, who came down. He was also a rock hand. So you had all these fascinating characters who somehow all ended up together. And gosh, what it would have been like to have been able to go to one of their dinner parties and listen to these, tales that they all told. And, we missed them all. For us, we're unfortunately, other than Ward, I never met any of those. Well, I did know Dick Sprang. I did meet him a couple of times. But for the most part, most of them were gone by the time I got interested in the history.
Sure. Well, music's still a big part of your life. What's a memorable music moment that you recall, either producing it or experiencing it?
Gosh, we've had some fun playing out on the stage there. I'll tell you, that's, there's nothing much better than when the sun's shining on the coxcomb, and it's just to that beautiful point in the evening when the light is really getting soft and people are having fun. I've had great fun in the audience, but I've had great fun on that stage. And boy, that's, remember the old stage, you're kind of afraid it's going to collapse under you. So the new one's a considerable improvement. That's been always been great fun. The festivals we've done have been, they're a lot of work, but they're rewarding.
Never was good work done without much trouble. That's
Very true.
Confucius. Yeah. Aardvark Guitars, tell us about that.
Well, it's a hobby business with Steve Lutz, who some of you know, otherwise known as Stevie Ray Lutz, bluesman, and Dave Payne, who's a heck of a guy and a very good amp repairman, and myself. And it started just, Dave and I were, honestly, I shouldn't admit this, but I was playing hooky from work on a Friday. And Dave and I said, well, let's go hit some pawn shops and see what we can find. And started talking, what we need is a vintage guitar business. We can lose more money on that than we do on everything else we already do. So we started collecting and working on vintage guitars. And for the first 6 months, it was Dave and me. And Steve kept agitating to be part of it. So after, we talked to him a little bit, and he was already my friend, but Dave didn't know him. And we said, okay, Steve would fit in, and he's continued to fit in for the last decade. So we do shows in Moab and LA and buy and sell vintage guitars. And occasionally we keep one or more.
I'm told you have a penchant for buying broken guitars. What's that about?
Well, I think Steve needs more to do, is what it is. And Steve's supposed to be repairing them. So if it's broken and I can take it to Steve and ask him to fix it, it gives him, keeps him off the streets and out of trouble. But he may see it differently. I don't know.
Well, what's your vision for the Bristlecones World Tour of Wayne County?
Oh, that's going to happen this year. We're going to do T-shirts, buttons, bumper stickers, and it's going to start in Loa and work its way east, starting on a Wednesday and through a Saturday. Or maybe we'll do it over 2 weeks, so the last half of the week over each week, playing one night in each municipality. And the newest addition to the concert schedule is we're going to play a show in Kitchen, which was between Giles and Blue Valley and was at one point a settlement. But we're going to try to find the foundations of whatever's left there and do a show there by generator power.
And do it as a fundraiser of sorts for each of these communities.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Kitchen, I'm not sure what it was to, but the others, I think it's great.
Okay. Well, Entrada, what do you see happening in 5 years, 10 years?
Well, for goodness sake, folks, we need your money. Give us your money. We need to finish the darn project. No, we will have the Entrada Center up and running and functioning. And honestly, as much as I love it, I'll be ready to turn it over to some younger folk, which we're in the process of doing. I mean, there are a lot of us who will stay involved. I suspect everybody. But it's time to let some of the people carry the water. And I want to go and sit on the patio and watch shows rather than, lug speakers around, that kind of thing. And I like doing it. I think the program is going to only get better. I think we're getting much better with, delivering, really valuable programs for the community, and look forward to the bigger stage there where we can do things like plays, symphony performances, that kind of thing. That we have a hard time, a little cramped here on this stage to do that. But it's going to be, I think, a real jewel in the performing arts centers in maybe not just in southern Utah, but in the state as a whole. I mean, you don't have that kind of backdrop everywhere.
That's true. Any more questions from this audience or online? Okay, Nikki.
So what's the most surprising change in Wayne County or Torrey that you've seen?
It was always fun. I mean, going back to when I was 8 years old, I mean, there was nothing better than going down with sitting in the back seat of the car and drinking, what's that awful orange soda? Orange Crush? Stuff would always make me sick. Inevitably, your parents have to pull the car over because anyway, that doesn't answer your question. I've been, I remember starting to read a little bit in the 90s about this thing called telecommuting. And I thought, well, that's interesting, but how will it work? What will you do for the work community if people are working from these remote places? And I remember when I was at Catalyst, Greta says, well, I'm sending you down to Moab, and here's where you're staying. We got some trade at this motel, and you're going to interview this guy, and he's a telecommuter. Well, I'd heard the term telecommuting. Oh, that's great. This guy was a programmer out of California who was living over in Spanish Valley. So, and Francois went with me to shoot the photos on that particular trip. I remember coming back distinctly, us talking and saying, oh, that's never going to happen in Wayne County. It's too remote. So you drive over to the Chuck Wagon or to the Taft Travel Plaza and get your Tribune at 10 in the morning that they bring over from Richfield. And that's how you kept up with the news. Or you had NPR, you have Utah Public Radio. But the way the world has changed as far as communication, and not always for good, but this idea that I'm going to have lunch with a friend, sit across the table, but I'm going to look at my phone the whole time. I don't find that to be a positive development. But whether we like it or not, and water being the one issue that we haven't resolved here, I think the town is going to change. I think there are going to be more people that are working remotely. I mean, I can do it now. I've got high-speed fiber to my house, so unless I need to meet with a client, I can do the drafting work and stuff I do down here in my office, my home office at my kitchen table.
Anybody else? Questions? Comments? So what's next for Barry Scholl?
More of the same. Playing music with the Bristol Cones and doing entrada and raising money and serving clients. That's pretty much. I don't see a lot, hanging out with my wife. We didn't talk about my wife, who's a lot smarter and better person than I am. But
You always say that you married up. So did I.
I totally married up.
We both did.
Yeah, my wife is the greatest. Tiffany is the absolute best, and my daughter's smart and capable, so I feel very fortunate, being that I'm not very bright. But I was smart enough to marry Tiffany and know I was going to marry her after like the second date, or at least hope so. So that's been great, but I don't see a lot of sea changes. You never know what life's going to throw in your direction, but I've had a lot of the same friends for decades and had the same family since I was a kid, so for the most part. So, I'm pretty happy.
Well, Barry, thanks so much.
Thanks to Entrada. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody, for being here. And